Let me tell you about the worst, most terrifying, most stomach-dropping day of my academic career at Velinox Unified Learning Center. And no, it was not the day I failed my quantum drift exam. Although that was also bad. That was very bad. My mother still brings it up at family meals. No. The day I am talking about is the day a human walked into classroom 7C, dropped her bag on the desk next to mine, looked at me with those small, unsettling, forward-facing predator eyes, and said, "Hey, I am Vora. Do you have a pencil?" I did not have a pencil. I could not speak. I could not move. My secondary breathing sac completely locked up. Now, before you judge me, you have to understand something. I am a Thelkian. We are a perfectly reasonable species. We are scholars. We are thinkers. We have 4 functioning brain lobes and an emotional regulation system that our therapists describe as almost impressive. We are not easily frightened, but we had all heard about humans. Everyone in the known galaxy had heard about humans. You could not attend a single interspecies relations lecture without some professor pulling up a holographic slide of Earth, the planet that should not exist, the planet that looked soft and blue and harmless from orbit, and then quietly listing its contents. Plate tectonics that swallow cities whole, storms that flatten entire coastlines, creatures that grow back their own limbs, insects the size of your fist that can kill you in under 4 minutes. And somehow, impossibly, thriving inside all of that, a species of small, soft, barely armored bipeds who decided that none of it was a problem.
Humans did not evolve on that planet. Humans won a war against that planet every single day for millions of years.
And one of them had just asked me for a pencil. "I do not carry pencils," I finally said. My voice came out approximately 3 octaves higher than usual. Vora shrugged. She reached into her bag and pulled out what I can only describe as 17 different writing instruments, selected one, clicked it twice with her thumb, and turned to face the front of the class like nothing had happened. I spent the next 4 minutes simply staring at the side of her face. She had a scar above her left ear, a small one, pale against her brown skin. I later found out she got it from something called a kitchen accident, which, on Earth, apparently happens to everyone at least once and is not considered remarkable in any way. On my homeworld, a scar means you survived something. It means you have a story. It means other people look at you differently. On Earth, apparently, it just means you were standing too close to the stove. Instructor Solbane walked in 3 minutes later, looked at Vora, looked at the rest of us, and said, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound casual, "Class, as you can see, we have a new student joining us from the Sol system. I trust you will all make her feel welcome." Nobody moved. Prin, my best friend, who sits 2 seats to my left, leaned over and whispered to me, "Is that a real human?" "Yes," I whispered back. "Like a real one? From the Deathworld?" "Her name is Vora, and she asked me for a pencil, and I nearly passed out." Prin stared at her for a long moment. Then Prin said, very quietly, "She is smaller than I expected." And I said, just as quietly, "That is exactly what worries me." Here is the thing about Vora. She was not trying to be intimidating. That, if anything, made it worse. On her first day, during Instructor Solbane's lecture on gravitational compression theory, Vora raised her hand and asked a question. A single question. It took Solbane 11 minutes to answer it, and by the end, Solbane was sweating from 2 of his 3 sweat glands simultaneously, which I had never seen before, and I had been in his class for 2 full academic cycles. On her second day, Vora arrived carrying a container of food she had prepared herself. She called it leftover chili. She offered some to Prin out of what appeared to be genuine friendliness. Prin declined, politely, and then spent the next 20 minutes quietly looking up the ingredients on her data pad. Capsaicin compounds, concentrated acidic tomato base, dried organic matter from multiple earth plant species, levels of sodium that would require a Thelkian to spend a week in a medical flush tank. Vora ate the entire container and then said, cheerfully, "I should have made it spicier." On her third day, she caught a falling shelf unit in the equipment storage room. It was a large one, metal-framed, loaded with calibration instruments. It had been leaning wrong for months and finally gave up. It tipped. We all scattered. Vora stepped forward, grabbed it with both hands, and held it. Just held it. Standing there with her feet planted and her jaw set, like this was a mild inconvenience and not a several 100-kilogram metal structure pressing down on her. She held it long enough for Instructor Solbane to call maintenance. She set it down when they arrived. She dusted her hands off on her trousers. Then she went back to her desk and finished her notes. None of us said anything. On her fourth day, 2 older students in the hallway, big ones, from the Varan exchange program, known campus-wide for being unpleasant, decided to say something rude to her as she passed. Something about her species, something that I will not repeat because it was genuinely offensive and also because what happened next made it irrelevant. Vora stopped walking. She turned around slowly. She looked at them. She did not raise her voice. She did not make a threatening gesture. She simply looked at them with those flat, forward-facing eyes and said very calmly, "Say that again." The 2 Varan students, who were both significantly larger than Vora in every measurable physical dimension, did not say it again. One of them stepped back. The other one suddenly found the floor extremely interesting. Vora nodded once. She turned back around. She kept walking. I watched this happen from 10 meters away. I stood perfectly still until she had rounded the corner. Then I turned to Prin and said, "We need to be very, very nice to her." Prin said, "I have been nice to her since day 1. I said, "I know. You are smarter than me." By the end of her first week, something had shifted across the whole campus. Nobody was rude to Vora. Nobody crowded her. People held doors for her. Prin had started sitting with her at lunch, which I found both impressive and slightly terrifying, and reported back to me that Vora was, quote, actually really funny. And she showed me pictures of her dog, and her dog is enormous and could probably eat a small ground vehicle. I said, "And you are still sitting with her?" Prin said, "Of course. She is great. Sit with us tomorrow." I did. And Prin was right. Vora was funny. She made jokes about her own planet. She had a laugh that was too loud for the cafeteria and did not seem to care at all. She asked about Thelkian food, and when I explained what we typically eat, she said, "Okay, but if I made you a sandwich, would you try it?" And I said, "Absolutely not." And she laughed again. It was a good week, a surprisingly good week. And then the problem arrived. The message came on a Thursday. Campus security flagged it and passed it to Chancellor Orveth's office. Chancellor Orveth, who I have always found to be a somewhat dramatic individual, called an emergency staff meeting, which somehow became less of an emergency the moment his assistant explained who the message was about. It was about Vora. Specifically, it was from a group called the Hollow Reach Collective. Now, if you have not heard of the Hollow Reach Collective, they are a mid-tier criminal organization operating out of the Drennick Belt, who specialize in, and I want to be precise here, interspecies political disruption. They are hired. They send people. Those people do things. It is not a pleasant business model. They had sent a message stating in formal and technical language that a target was currently enrolled at Velinox Unified Learning Center. That target was Vora. The reason for the contract was listed as diplomatic leverage regarding the Sol System Expansion Treaty. Apparently, Vora's parent held a significant political position back on Earth, and someone, somewhere, had decided that making Vora disappear would send a useful message. The message also stated that 3 operatives had been dispatched, and that the operation would be conducted at a time and place of their choosing. Now, when I tell you that Chancellor Orveth's response to this was to contact the Hollow Reach Collective's registered legal representative and ask them to please reconsider, I want you to understand that I am not exaggerating. That is what he did. He sent a formal diplomatic inquiry. He asked them to reconsider. He did not warn Vora. He did not increase security. He did not contact Earth Diplomatic Services. He sent a message asking them, politely, to perhaps not do the crime at his school. I found out about all of this later. Much later. After the hallway. After everything. But even without knowing the details, the tension on campus that week was strange. There were students who had heard whispers. There were staff members who were walking faster than usual. There were unfamiliar faces in places that unfamiliar faces had no business being. Prin noticed them first. She mentioned it to me on Wednesday, 2 days before everything happened. She said, "Have you seen those 3 in the East Wing, near the water stations?" I said, "No." She said, "They do not look like students. They do not look like staff. They have been there for 2 days." I said, "Maybe they are maintenance contractors." Prin looked at me the way she always looks at me when I say something she finds disappointingly naive. She said, "They are watching Classroom 7C. I went cold in all 4 of my primary temperature zones simultaneously." I said, "Should we tell someone?" Prin said, "I already told security. They said they would look into it." They did not look into it. And on Friday morning, when Vora walked into Classroom 7C at the start of first period, carrying her bag and her ridiculous collection of writing instruments and a travel container of something that smelled like burned herbs and determination, 3 professionals from the Hollow Reach Collective were positioning themselves in the hallway outside. They were patient. They were prepared. They had, by all accounts, done this sort of thing many times before. What they had not done, apparently, was any meaningful research on their target. I did not know any of this was happening during class. I want to make that very clear. I was sitting in Classroom 7C, trying to absorb a lecture about resonance mapping in binary star systems, which is a topic I genuinely care about, and I was doing my best to focus. Vora was sitting next to me. She had already filled 2 pages of notes. She had asked one question that caused Solbani to pause for 45 seconds before answering. She had also, at some point, eaten a small wrapped food item from her pocket, with the quiet efficiency of someone who views eating as a mechanical process and not a social experience. I watched her eat it. I could not help it. Everything she did was fascinating, in the way that watching a natural disaster form on the horizon is fascinating. You know you should probably do something productive. You cannot look away. At one point, she caught me staring and said, very quietly, "You want one?" I said, "No, thank you." She shrugged and went back to her notes. Outside in the hallway, according to what I pieced together later from security footage, and the very detailed testimony that Prin provided to Chancellor Orveth's office, with the energy of someone who had been waiting their entire life to deliver a detailed testimony, the 3 operatives had taken positions. Kaida, the lead, was standing near the main hallway junction, tall, blue-gray skin, the kind of stillness that does not come naturally. It is practiced. It is trained. She had something under her jacket that the security footage could not clearly identify, but that the forensic team later described as an energy disruption tool with a Drenic manufacturing signature. Rusk was near the water stations, heavy-set, pale. He kept checking a handheld device, reading something. Movin was closest to the classroom door. He was the one who was supposed to move first. He was supposed to intercept Vora the moment she stepped into the hallway at the end of class, when she would be in the flow of other students, when confusion would provide cover. It was a reasonable plan. It was probably a plan that had worked before, on other targets, in other hallways. The morning period had 40 minutes remaining when I noticed Prin was not paying attention to the lecture. She was staring at the small transparent panel in the classroom door, the narrow strip of reinforced glass that shows a thin slice of the hallway. I leaned toward her and whispered, "What are you looking at?" Prin said, very quietly, "They are out there." I said, "Who?" She looked at me. She did not say anything else. My stomach dropped directly through the floor, or the closest thing a Thelkian has to a stomach. The digestive processing chamber, if you want to be technical about it. I looked at Vora. She was still writing notes. Her handwriting was small and precise and completely unbothered by the universe around it. I looked at the door panel. I could see the edge of a figure. Movin'. Standing close. Not moving. I spent the next 38 minutes in a state that I can only describe as a full system malfunction. I could not listen to the lecture. I could not think. I could not act. I was completely, catastrophically useless. Prin, meanwhile, had quietly opened her datapad and was typing something. I found out later she had sent an emergency alert to campus security, to the Thelkian Embassy District Office, and to the Earth Diplomatic Services hotline, in that order. The campus security response time was 12 minutes. The Earth Diplomatic Services hotline responded in 30 seconds and immediately began tracing the alert's source. But none of that mattered, because the bell rang first. The bell at Velinox Unified Learning Center is a tone, a clean, sustained tone at a frequency calibrated to be audible across 6 different species' hearing ranges. It lasts exactly 2 seconds. I have heard that bell hundreds of times. I will never hear it the same way again. It rang. Instructor Solbane said, "We will pick up resonance mapping on Monday." Students began moving. Chairs shifted. Bags were picked up. The normal, comfortable end-of-period chaos began filling the room. I grabbed Prin's arm. I said, "We have to stop her." Prin said, "How?" I said, "I do not know. Create a distraction. Drop something. Knock something over." Prin said, "If I do that, she will just stop to help me, and she will still end up in the hallway." She was right. That was the problem. That was the fundamental, unavoidable problem with trying to protect Vora. Every instinct Vora had pointed outward, toward other people, toward problems. You could not slow her down by creating a problem because she would simply add solving your problem to her list of things to handle. Vora stood up. She put her datapad in her bag. She put her notes in her bag. She picked up the travel container that had held her burned herb drink. She looked at me and said, "You good? You look weird." I said, "I am fine." I was not fine. She said, "Okay, see you in 3rd period." And she turned toward the door. I said, "Vora, wait." She looked back. "What's up?" I opened my mouth. I had no words. What was I going to say? "There are people outside who want to hurt you?" She was from Earth. Earth. A planet where the weather itself could kill you. Where organisms the size of a hand had enough venom to kill something 50 times their size. Where humans had somehow, across millions of years, decided that the correct response to a hostile universe was to walk toward it with their hands open. What was I going to tell her? Be careful? She was already careful. She was careful in a way that I did not have a category for. She was careful the way a planet is careful. The gravity is always on. The surface is always solid. The mountain does not worry about the storm. I said, "Have a good rest of your morning." She gave me a slightly confused look, like she suspected I had been about to say something else. Then she nodded once and pushed through the classroom door and stepped into the hallway. I looked at Prin. Prin looked at me. We both moved toward the door. What I saw through the door panel before I pushed it open was approximately 1 second of footage that my brain has been replaying in high definition ever since. Movin moved first. That was the plan. He stepped in front of Vora the moment she cleared the classroom doorway. He was quick, professional. He had something in his right hand, and he raised it. Vora looked at it. Then she looked at him. She said, "No, that was it. Just no." Flat, calm. The same voice she used when she told the cafeteria server she did not want extra sauce. And then, before Movin had processed the word, before his professional brain had registered that his target had spoken and that the word was not the expected category of word, a frightened noise or a submission signal, she moved. I cannot fully explain what happened in the next several seconds because I was not trained to observe it. I was trained to study stellar cartography and advanced physics theory. My visual processing is optimized for detail work and long-range scanning. It is not optimized for tracking the movements of an apex predator from a Deathworld operating at what I later understood was somewhere around 40 to 60% of her actual capability. Movin's arm went in a direction arms are not supposed to go. The thing in his hand was somewhere else. Movin was on the floor. It happened before the door had fully opened. Rusk, who had been near the water stations and who was presumably a professional and presumably had training and presumably had been in situations before, moved toward her. He was fast. He covered the distance quickly. He had the size advantage, significantly, and he had something in his left hand that he was raising. Vora turned toward him with the unhurried rotation of someone who had already calculated the geometry of the situation and found it manageable. She did not block what he was doing with his left hand. She redirected it. There is a difference. Blocking is resistance. Redirecting is navigation. She moved him the way a river moves a stone that falls into it. It does not fight the stone. It simply flows around it, and the stone ends up somewhere that was not where it intended to be. Rusk ended up against the hallway wall. He made a sound that I will not try to describe. He did not get up. Kada came last. Kada, who I had only seen from the edge of the door panel, who had been still and quiet and professional all morning. She came around the hallway junction at speed, and she did not hesitate, and she had clearly been in many situations before, because she approached differently than the other two. She was not reading Vora as a problem to overpower. She was reading her as a problem to outmaneuver. She was almost right. She was almost good enough. Almost. What Kada had not accounted for, what none of them had accounted for, was that Vora had grown up on a planet where the threats do not wait for you to finish processing, where the ground itself can betray you, where the thing that wants to hurt you is not always larger than you. Sometimes it is smaller. Sometimes it is faster. Sometimes it has been watching you since before you knew it was there. Kada lasted longer than the other two. I will give her that. When it was over, the hallway contained 3 professionals from the Hollow Reach Collective in various states of incapacitation, a scattered collection of items that security would later spend 2 days cataloging, and Vora. Vora was standing in the middle of it, breathing. Not heavily, barely. She had a small cut on her left forearm that was already starting to close the way human wounds apparently do, with an efficiency that our medical staff found genuinely alarming when they saw it later. She was looking at the 3 figures on the floor with an expression I could only describe as mildly inconvenienced. Then she looked up. She looked directly at the door panel. She could see us through it. Me and Prin, standing there with our faces pressed against the glass, like 2 absolutely ridiculous witnesses to history. She raised an eyebrow. She said, through the door, loudly enough for us to hear, "You can come out now. I think we are good." I looked at Prin. Prin looked at me. Prin pushed the door open. I stepped into the hallway. I want to say I stepped in with composure, with the calm, measured response of an educated Thelkian who had processed the situation and arrived at a rational next step. What actually happened is that I stepped in, looked at the hallway, looked at the 3 professional operatives no longer being professional or operative in any meaningful sense, looked at Vora standing in the middle of it all, and made a sound. I do not know how to spell the sound. It was not language. It was just a sound. My translation implant did not know what to do with it either, because Prin later told me it rendered as unidentified Thelkian vocalization, possible distress indicator, non-urgent. Non-urgent. Right. Vora looked at me. She said, "You okay?" I said, "You just." She waited. I said, "They were." She waited again, patient, entirely unbothered. I said, "There were 3 of them." Vora glanced back at the hallway. She seemed to be doing a quick count. She nodded. "Yeah, 3. I said, "Professional operatives. From the Hollow Reach Collective. They were sent here to." "I figured," she said. She crouched down next to Movin, who was conscious but extremely unhappy about it, checked something about his condition with the brisk efficiency of someone who has done basic injury assessment before, then stood back up. "He is okay. His shoulder is going to need work, but he is not in danger." I stared at her. I said, "You checked if he was okay?" "Yeah. He was trying to hurt you." Vora looked at me like I had said something faintly confusing. She said, "That does not mean I want him to die in a school hallway." I processed this for a moment. Then I said, "You knew. Did you know?" Vora was quiet for a second. Then she said, "I noticed them on Wednesday." I said, "Wednesday?" "Yeah, near the water stations, and the junction, and outside the classroom. They were not subtle." She paused. "Well, Kata was subtle. The other 2, not so much." I said, "And you came out anyway." She looked at me. There was something in her expression that was not quite a smile, and not quite something harder than a smile. It was somewhere between the 2. She said, "Where else was I going to go? Class was over." Prin made a sound at this point that I think was the Thelkian equivalent of a short circuit. I said, "Vora, you walked out knowing 3 armed professionals were waiting to hurt you." She thought about this. She said, I was hoping they would decide not to. I gave Movin a full second to make a different choice." 1 second. "That is a lot of time," she said simply, and she was not being sarcastic. She genuinely meant it. She had given him a full human second to make a different decision, and in her framework, in the framework built by a species that had grown up on the worst planet in the known galaxy, 1 second was not a small thing. 1 second was enormous. 1 second was grace. I sat down on the hallway floor. I sat down. My legs made a decision without consulting the rest of me. Vora looked down at me. She said, "Are you sure you are okay?" I said, "I need a moment." She said, "Take your time." She stood there, in the wreckage of the hallway, and waited for me to reboot. Campus security arrived 4 minutes after the bell. They found 3 incapacitated operatives, 2 extremely disturbed Thelkian students, and 1 human who had found a wall section to lean against and was apparently using the wait time to catch up on notes she had not finished during class. The lead security officer, a Varan named Breath, looked at the hallway, looked at Vora, looked at his team, and said, "We got the alert. We came as fast as we could." Vora looked up from her notes. She said, "It is fine. They are contained." Breath looked at contained. Breath looked back at Vora. He said, "Did you? Are you? Is this?" Vora said helpfully, "3 of them. The one near the junction was the best trained. The one by the water stations is going to need his shoulder looked at. The one who moved first might have a mild concussion. I tried to keep the impact low." Breath said, "You tried to keep the impact," Vora confirmed. "I did not want to cause serious damage. They were doing a job, not a personal thing." This distinction appeared to be important to her. I am not sure Breath understood it. I am not entirely sure I understood it. But she said it with complete sincerity. The way you state a fact about gravity or light speed. It just was how it was. Security spent the next hour processing the scene. Chancellor Orveth arrived, looking like a person who had made several professional mistakes and was now face to face with the consequences. He attempted to explain his decisions. Vora listened to him politely. She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten him. She just listened. And when he was finished, she said, "Okay. I will be telling my parent about this. I am sure the embassy will follow up." Orveth went a color I had not previously seen him achieve. Prin gave her full statement to security, with the precision and thoroughness of someone who had been rehearsing it in her head since Wednesday. It was detailed. It named dates and times and positions. It included diagrams. Prin had drawn diagrams in the margins of her datapad notes. Security looked at the diagrams. Security looked at Prin. Security said, "Did you consider a career in tactical analysis?" Prin said, "I am currently considering it more seriously than I was this morning." Earth Diplomatic Services arrived 2 hours later. 2 humans in formal dress with the specific energy of people who had dealt with this type of situation before, and were mildly irritated that it had happened again. They spoke with Vora privately for about 20 minutes. When they came out, one of them said something to Orveth that I could not hear, but that made him sit down very quickly. The other one came over to me and Prin and said, "I understand you both attempted to warn security and sent an alert through the diplomatic hotline." Prin said, "Yes." The diplomatic officer looked at us for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you. That was the right thing to do." Prin said, "We were scared." The officer said, "Being scared and doing the right thing anyway is not a small thing." Later, when the statements were done and the hallway had been cleared, and Orveth had presumably gone to rethink several chapters of his professional life, Vora found me and Prin near the East Wing entrance. She was carrying a bag. She reached into it and pulled out a wrapped item and held it out to me. A sandwich. "You never tried one," she said. I looked at the sandwich. I thought about the day. I thought about the hallway. I thought about 1 second of grace given to a man who did not deserve it, by someone who had grown up on a planet that gave nobody any grace at all. I took the sandwich. I unwrapped it. I took a bite. It was not as alarming as I expected. There was something sharp in it, something acidic, something that immediately began doing things to my palate that I had not consented to. Vora watched me eat it. She said, "Good?" I said, "It is a lot." She grinned. full and loud and entirely too big for the situation. I ate the rest of it. I have been in school for most of my life. I have sat in a lot of classrooms. I have taken a lot of notes and passed a lot of exams and heard a lot of lectures from a lot of instructors who believed, sincerely, that the information they were sharing was important. None of them taught me anything as clearly as that hallway did. I used to think about humans the way most of my species thinks about humans, as a fact. A recorded, catalogued, academically processed fact. Humans are from a death world. Humans have anomalous resilience. Humans are statistically extraordinary in their survival metrics. You read it. You note it. You move on. I did not understand it until I stood at that door panel and watched Vora step into a hallway where 3 professionals were waiting for her, and I understood, in a way that no lecture had ever communicated, that she was not surviving despite where she came from. She was everything that planet built. Every gravity shift, every predator, every storm, every piece of hostile chemistry that had ever tried to end a human life, and failed, was present in the way she moved, in the way she stood, in the 1 second she gave Movin to choose differently. That planet did not break humans. It finished them. Like a blade gets finished, like something gets forged, and the part that I keep coming back to, the part that lives in my head and does not leave, is that she checked on them afterward, the people who were sent to hurt her. She crouched down and she checked, and she told security which injuries needed attention first. I asked her about it later, during lunch, after everything had calmed down into the specific, exhausted quiet that follows a very long morning. I said, "Why did you check on them?" Vora thought about it. She drank something hot from her travel container. She said, "Because they were hurt." I said, "They were trying to hurt you." She said, "Yeah, and they failed, and now they were hurt." Those are 2 separate facts. I said, "Most people would not think of them as separate." She looked at me. She said, "Where I am from, if you only help people who deserve it, you end up not helping very many people." I sat with that for a while. Prin, from across the table, said, "Is that an Earth proverb?" Vora shrugged. She said, "It is just how it is." We sat in the cafeteria for another hour. We talked about other things, about the resonance mapping lecture, about Prin's interest in tactical analysis, which Vora found genuinely impressive, about the sandwich and whether I would try another one, about Earth a little, about a dog named something I could not pronounce that was apparently the size of a transport vehicle and was very gentle and liked to sleep on Vora's feet. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, eating food that was too much for my system and laughing at a story about a dog and a piece of furniture that the dog had decided was also a dog, I realized something. I was not scared of Vora anymore. Not because she was not capable of everything I had seen in that hallway. She absolutely was. She was more capable than I had even processed yet, and I suspected I was still only seeing the surface of it. But I was not scared because of something else, something harder to put a name to. She was sitting across from me, in a cafeteria on a planet that was not hers, surrounded by species that had been nervously stepping around her all week, eating food that nobody else in the room would touch, and she was completely at ease. Not because she was not paying attention. She was always paying attention. I understood that now. The stillness was not absence of awareness. It was the opposite. It was total awareness, settled so deeply into the bones that it did not need to announce itself. She was at ease because she had already decided, before the morning started, before any of it happened, that whatever came through that door, she would handle it. And she had. I asked her, near the end of lunch. "One more question." I said, "Were you scared? In the hallway?" She was quiet for a moment. She picked up her travel container. She said, "A little." "Right at the start." I said, "What did you do with it?" She looked at me with those flat, forward